Hi everyone, welcome back. So we're going to get started talking about the diversity of life in this unit. We're going to start though by talking about how that life is categorized. So we previously discussed that all living things are made of cells. This is all stuff from cell theory. That all living things are cellular in nature. Anything simpler, or smaller than a cell is not alive. Only cells are alive. But among all of those cells that exist, they are not all the same. There are some pretty major differences that exist between these groups. So we're going to start by kind of diving into that. Now, some organisms have cells that have a really high degree of internal compartmentalization. A cell has to do a lot of different tasks to survive, and some cells will divvy up those tasks to be performed only in specific places of the cell. So we're probably well acquainted at this point with a lot of the organelles that humans have, for example. The nucleus, the rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus, the mitochondria, the lysosome, and more. Well, there are tasks that a cell has to do that are only performed in one of these types of organelle. So, for example, the lysosome is this site of digestion and breakdown. A lot of the things that the cell brings in or needs to recycle are brought there to be broken down into smaller elements. The nucleus, the site of DNA storage and maintenance. These tasks don't happen elsewhere in the cell. That's only something that is performed there in those specific organelles. So this quality, the possession of organelles in a nucleus, well, this is something that defines eukaryotes. Okay, this name is it's eukarya. This is a Greek Greek terminology. So eu in this case is Greek for good, karya for kernel. You put these things together, and it's a reference to these organelles, and in particular the nucleus, that researchers, when they first started to describe these cells, were starting to identify. This group is pretty diverse. It contains animals, plants, fungi, protozoans, and also a lesser known group called chromists, all of which we're going to explore in some shape or form in future units here. Okay. Now this group stands opposed to another one called prokarya. Okay, also Greek, but in this case, pro means before. So before kernel. That name is a reference to these organisms lacking a nucleus or any other organelles for that matter. This includes bacteria and archaea. These are both groups that are very diverse, extremely diverse, and very different from one another as well, although it might not look like it to our eyes. We'll explore that diversity soon as well. All of these prokaryotes, they have another important quality to them, and that is that they are exclusively unicellular. All prokaryotes are only made up of a single cell, unlike us and a lot of other eukaryotic life, which are multicellular. Now, eukaryotes, there are unicellular and multicellular representatives of eukarya, but prokaryotes can only be unicellular. Okay, now that doesn't mean that that prokaryotes can't cooperate with one another. They can, and we're going to explore that as well in the future. I'm just laying the groundwork for that here. Now, these different major groups, the animals, plants, fungi, the protozoans, those chromists, bacteria, and archaea. Well, we can classify them not just by their cell anatomy. We actually separate these into three distinct groups, these supergroups that we call domains, the three domains of life. So those three domains you will definitely need to remember. Those are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Eukarya being its own domain of life that contains all these other groups. Okay? This is part of what we call our taxonomic classification of life. By grouping these living things by their shared similarities and ancestry, a lot of which we now are working out through comparisons of their genetics, we can separate these groups out based on their relatedness to one another. And to that end, we have three distinct major groups that life falls into: bacteria, archaea, eukarya. Okay? Now, another thing we have to talk about here is what a species is. It's a term that will definitely come up time and time again. And it's something that also doesn't have like that easy of a definition. The further you get in biology, you will learn that what a species is kind of a argumentative subject. It's not always so clear, and scientists fight about this kind of stuff all the time. But for our purposes, a species is a group of related organisms of the same major type. They share a huge amount of similarities, and particularly in their genetic information, their DNA and their genes. And for species that can sexually reproduce, that like require a partner to reproduce, a species is a group that reproduce more among their own group than across groups with other major groups. So like I mentioned, species are kind of difficult to define. This is an effective definition, at least for our needs. There is, however, an important way that we write a species name, because all species are given a name by us. We follow this Linnaean taxonomic nomenclature, set forth by this really influential person in taxonomy named Carl Linnaeus, way back in the 1700s. And of course, it's changed a little bit over the years, but the basic framework is still the same. There's a very specific structure for a species name. Okay, take for example this species here. This is the red fox. Okay, its species name is Vulpes vulpes. So this is a little bit silly sounding, but it means something very specific. Vulpes, the one that's in capital, the first one in the name, this is the name of the genus that foxes fall into. And then the lowercase vulpes, that is the name of the specific species within the genus. Okay? So Vulpes vulpes, that is the red fox. Not some other kind of fox, but the red fox. Similarly, humans also have a species name. We are Homo sapiens, okay? And so our genus, the genus is Homo, and we are sapiens of the genus Homo, okay? That's effectively what our name means. Now, there are some other important things I want to make sure to talk about here. That species, this is a very specific grouping down here. There are things that are more specific than a species in the way that we classify life, but this is the major taxonomic group that is the narrowest in scope that we typically talk about. But there are many species that may be within a genus. There are many genera, plural for genus, that are within a family. There are many families that may be within an order. There are many orders that may be within a class. There are many classes that may be within a phylum. There are many phyla that may be within a kingdom, and there may be many kingdoms within a domain. So let's take a look at that for this species here. Vulpes vulpes is the species name. This species belongs to the genus Vulpes, which belongs to the family Canidae, which belongs to the order Carnivora, which belongs to the class Mammalia. It's a mammal, okay? Which belongs to the phylum Chordata, all right? Which belongs to the kingdom Animalia, is an animal. And then animals, as we discussed previously, belong to the domain Eukarya, okay? So there's a classification of living things that falls under this this category. All right, and we can kind of show through this categorization of life how this species is related to all of these other species that we may discuss, even to us. So here are some more examples of this. Okay, red fox, Vulpes vulpes, is on the left here, and then the Arctic fox, Vulpes lagopus, that is on the right. So both of these are members of the same genus, but they are distinct species. And that's because they have considerable genetic differences, and in particular, they don't really interbreed all that much. It's a rarity that they do. It's not necessarily an impossibility for them, but they don't really do it in practice all that much. Okay, so these are some qualities that we typically separate things out by species. Now, we can do the same thing for bacteria as well, for microorganisms. This is Staphylococcus aureus on the left. This is Staphylococcus epidermidis on the right. I know they don't look all that different, but they are. They're genetically separate species, but they belong to the same genus, Staphylococcus. Okay? Physically very hard to distinguish, but there are definitely important ways that we can distinguish them. And you may be doing this in class using some different tools that we're going to explore. Now, within a species, we can also find more variation. Members of a species are not all completely uniform. Think about your species. Humans are incredibly different from individual to individual. Okay? We're genetically really variable, even though we belong to the same species. Some species can exhibit subspecies groups. Okay? That is a subgroup within a genus that follow a really similar pattern to like a species, where they mainly breed with one another. They're highly genetically distinct and very have like traits that are very iconic of that subspecies. Okay, that subgroup. Humans don't fall into this category. We are incredibly variable, yes, but there aren't really any subspecies level differences between humans. We're all the same thing, even though we have distinct like ethnicities and things like that. Those are not so different among us that we're different subspecies. But other species can often exhibit these subspecies level characteristics. Then we also have strains. Now this is typically a thing we talk about with microorganisms, which are often asexual, and so they don't need a partner to replicate. They just copy themselves. They essentially, when they reproduce, they make like 100% genetically identical copies of their original cell, and then just make more of that. And so a strain is a distinct genetic variant of a single species. That term becomes less useful for like sexually reproducing species like us, because every time that we mate with a partner and have a child, that child is genetically only about 50% related to you and 50% related to the partner. We shuffle up those genes all the time. So every individual effectively is going to be a strain of human. But for microbes, that's a much more useful distinction. Okay? So strains can also become a very distinct subgroup with their own unique set of genetic information. Sometimes this is very trait-based, where they could have a specific gene or a specific mutation of a gene that makes them behave very differently. It might make them antibiotic resistant. It might make them a more effective pathogen. It might make them more able to digest fructose, right? It's incredibly variable what that can look like. Strains can be really important from a medical perspective, because that can be essentially a new variant of a species that behaves very differently in a medical situation. Again, rising of a species, or I'm sorry, a strain that is like resistant to a specific antibiotic, right? Really problematic for us. A new strain that is able to get around a vaccine, our vaccinated defenses that we've set up for something like influenza, a major challenge that we have to deal with. Again, even though viruses are not living, they can still evolve, and so they can still exhibit strains. And this itself is why every year we have new strains of influenza that we have to remake our vaccines for that target those new specific strains. So here are some other examples of this, right? Here are two foxes. You have the red fox, Vulpes vulpes, on the left, and you have the silver fox, Vulpes vulpes, on the right. These are actually the same species of fox, even though they look extremely different. The silver fox is just something we call a melanistic morph of this species. It just means that they have a lot of extra melanin. It turns their in this case their fur a lot darker in color, so they have a very distinctive appearance compared to the other variation of the species. So this is very similar to a strain, the genetic variant that exhibit distinct physical differences. On the microbial end, here we have Staph aureus on the left, and then we have methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, or MRSA, on the right. Again, physically extremely similar, but behaviorally extremely different. On the left, this staph can be treated with some kind of penicillin derivative. But on the right, this is a species that is very resistant to these medications. And thus it creates a major medical issue when a person contracts this as a skin infection. So these are the same species but different strains with serious implications for medicine and for treatment. So this here is a rough representation, an artistic rendering of the three major domains of life, those three major groups that we were talking about: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And moving forward, we're going to dive into these major groups, each of them in much more detail. So this is another representation of that same tree. When we pick up in the next lecture, we're going to actually start with bacteria and archaea. We're going to start with the prokaryotes.